Perhaps death is only a doorway. And sometimes there are souls who step through it only to return, not out of fear, but because they have not yet finished saying what life needed to hear. There are moments when the line between life and death is thinner than a single breath. We often believe that when the heart stops beating, everything ends. But is that truly so? There are those whose bodies cease to move, and yet their consciousness seems to remain. In the distant monasteries of Siberia, a lama has been sitting still for nearly a century, his body untouched by decay. On the high mountains of Tibet, a monk was said to have dissolved into pure light, returning his body to the void. In Guangdong, the sixth patriarch Huineng has sat unmoving for more than 1,000 years, and his body can still be seen today. And in Saigon, a monk sat in the middle of the flames, calm as if in deep meditation, leaving behind a heart that no fire could burn. If death is only a doorway, then perhaps there are minds that have chosen to remain beyond it to show us that consciousness can transcend the boundaries of dissolution. But then, what is consciousness? Is it merely the stream of thoughts flowing through our minds each day? Or is it something that continues even when we no longer have this body? The stories of those who stayed have led scientists, monks, and seekers alike to revisit the oldest question humanity has ever asked. When death comes, where do we go? Or perhaps we simply change form and continue the journey called consciousness. We grow up believing something simple, that life is the beginning and death is the end. But sometimes, in that fragile instant when the heart stops beating, something within us doesn't stop. Doctors at the University of Michigan once recorded something unexpected. When patients passed away, their brain waves, which should have gone flat, suddenly spiked with bursts of energy. A final surge of light, as if the mind flared brightly one last time before fading into the dark. People who have experienced clinical death tell similar stories. They say they could see their own bodies from above, surrounded by light, and sometimes they heard a gentle voice calling their name. When they returned, they no longer feared death, only wondered softly, where was I just now? If science describes death through signals in brain activity, spiritual traditions describe it through something else, consciousness. In Tibetan Buddhism, it's said that when breathing stops, the mind enters an intermediate state, the bardo. Some masters can remain in tukdom, where the body stays warm and serene, while the consciousness has already entered deep meditation. Perhaps science and spirituality are not contradicting each other, they're simply describing the same mystery in two different languages. And if one day you were to cross that boundary, would you know? Could consciousness exist without this body to hold it? If there truly is a place in between, would you have the courage to look into it? Some say death is the deepest sleep, except that when you wake, you're no longer the same. Others believe consciousness never dies. It only moves, like a river flowing through different lands, always water, just changing shape. Throughout history, there have been those who reached that boundary and chose to stay. They sat in fire without fear, in silence without breath. Their bodies stopped, yet something greater within them kept living. They didn't stay to defy death, but to remind us that death itself may not be the final word. Perhaps the veil between life and death was never truly a wall. Maybe it was only fear that made us believe we were divided. And beyond that veil, there are minds whose bodies have turned to dust, but whose awareness still glows, like a lamp that never went out. They remained to finish the story that life had not yet understood. And so throughout the flow of history, there have been those who truly chose to stay. They never spoke of it. They never tried to prove anything. They simply sat still and let time do the proving. Some sat among snow and silence. Some dissolved into light. Some remained through 1,000 years. And some sat in fire with faces calm as the dawn. Each of them was a doorway, a quiet passage into the realm where life and death no longer stand apart. In Siberia, where winter lasts more than half the year, and the wind erases footprints as soon as they're made, there stands a small wooden temple. Beneath the frozen earth of that lonely plain, a lama has been sitting in silence for nearly a century. His name was Dorjo Itigilov. Born in 1852, he became the spiritual leader of Buryatia, a land where Tibetan Buddhism met the soul of Russia. He lived simply, meditating, teaching, healing the sick. Monks say that even on mornings when snow piled high around the temple, he would sweep the courtyard slowly, whispering, "The cold can touch the body, but never the mind." When age began to weigh on him in 1927, he called his disciples and said softly, "I will enter meditation in the lotus posture. After 30 years, if you feel the time is right, open the stupa and look upon me." He then sat down, his hands resting gently on his knees, his breath growing slower until it stopped. No one said he had died. They only said, "The master has entered the deepest meditation." The monks placed his body in a wooden box, lowered it into the frozen soil of Siberia, and left him there to meditate beneath the silence of snow. Decades passed. Wars came and went. Empires rose and fell. But in that little temple, nothing changed. The wind still sang through the pines, and beneath the ground, their teacher sat undisturbed. In 2002, the monks reopened the tomb. What they found stunned them. His body had not decayed. The skin still supple, the joints still flexible, as if he had only fallen asleep. Russian biologists examined him, looking for traces of chemicals or embalming. They found none. Their report ended with one line: "A naturally preserved biological state, unprecedented." Since then, Lama Itigilov has been revered as a symbol of stillness beyond time. Yet in the monastery, the monks never call it a miracle. They simply say, "The master never left. He is only meditating deeper than we are." Today, if you visit Buryatia, you can peer through the thick glass of a small chamber and see him, sitting in full lotus posture, his face serene, his robe intact, bathed in the cold blue light of the Siberian lamps. The guide will gently remind visitors, "Please speak softly." The Lama is meditating, and in that moment, something unspoken fills the air, a kind of quiet so alive that even time seems to hold its breath. Perhaps, in the stillness of Siberia, where Lama Itigilov remains seated in the cold, people realize something profound, that life does not always need to move in order to continue. But elsewhere, in another distant land, where the sky feels close enough to touch, consciousness chose a different way to depart. If Itigilov was the symbol of stillness, the one who came next became the symbol of dissolution. If in Siberia time stood still, then in Tibet, time melted into light. On the high plateau of Tibet, where the clouds drift so low, they seem to brush against the earth. People tell of an old monk, gentle, humble, who spent his final years in a small monastery in Nagju. His name was Khenpo Acho. Throughout his life, he did only one thing. He sat, he chanted, and he smiled. Disciples recalled that each morning he would light the stove himself, brewing butter tea for everyone. His hands were wrinkled, but his eyes were bright, like those of a child. Once someone asked, "Master, what happens after death?" He only smiled. "There is no after death. There is only continuation in another form." In the summer of 1998, his body began to weaken. He told his students, "Do not be sad. When I leave, do not disturb me. I am only returning to the light." That day, he sat down in meditation, hands forming a mudra before his chest. His breath slowed and stopped. There were no tears, only an uncanny peace. Then, something extraordinary began to happen. His body did not grow cold. The skin stayed soft, pink, his face calm, as if dreaming. And then, as witnesses described, his body began to shrink. It did not decay, nor emit any odor, but seemed to dissolve into the air itself. Day by day, his form grew smaller, until only his yellow robe remained, and a few strands of hair upon the cushion. Nothing else. The monks called it rainbow body, for when it happened, soft light streamed through the window, and some said they saw delicate hues dancing gently across the room. In Tibetan Buddhism, the rainbow body is said to be the highest realization of meditation, when body and mind merge into pure energy, transcending the physical realm. No birth, no death, only awakening. But in that monastery, no one called it a miracle. They simply said, "The master has gone, but he never really left." A young disciple later wrote in his journal, "I sat where he once sat, closed my eyes, and saw light seeping through my eyelids. I thought perhaps the master was smiling." Today, in that humble monastery high above the clouds, they still keep the cushion where he passed away. There is no body, only empty space. Yet every morning, when sunlight filters through the window, it stops exactly where he once sat, as if someone were still there, in perfect silence. Perhaps, after dissolving into the radiant light of Tibet, we all need a pause, a single gentle breath, to return to where that light was first born, the quiet wisdom of the mind. Not all light is dazzling. Some light comes from meditation, not the kind that blinds, but the kind that softly illuminates from within. And in ancient China, there was a man who carried that light inside him, a light of understanding, of silent awareness that has endured through more than 1,000 years, without fading. On the slopes of Mount Nanhua, among bamboo and drifting clouds, there stands a temple that has lasted over 13 centuries, Nanhua Temple. And inside it, the 6th patriarch of Chinese Zen, Huineng, still sits in meditation. Not as a legend, not as a statue, but truly and still there. For over a millennium, his body has remained intact. They call it the incorruptible body. Huineng was born in 638 CE, a poor woodcutter who could not read or write. One day, as he heard someone reciting the Diamond Sutra, a single verse awakened his mind. He left the forest, traveled to the Huangmei Monastery, and eventually received the robe and bowl, becoming the 6th patriarch. All his life, he taught people to look inward, not to seek the Buddha outside themselves. He said, "Bodhi is not a tree, nor is the bright mirror a stand. Since there is nothing from the beginning, where can the dust alight?" In 713, knowing his time was near, he sat cross-legged and told his disciples not to grieve. He simply said, "After I go, keep your hearts at peace. And if anyone asks where I am, tell them I am in silence." He closed his eyes, his posture still upright, while the scent of incense filled the temple. The monks placed his body inside a stone stupa. Dynasties rose and fell, yet when the tomb was later opened, his form remained unchanged. Skin smooth, hands and limbs still soft, as if he were still deep in meditation. Today at Nanhua Temple, pilgrims from around the world come to bow before that sacred body. Behind glass, his face is calm, his eyes gently closed, and a faint smile rests upon his lips, thin as smoke. Those who stand before him for a long while say they feel a strange stillness arise within, as if someone had quietly touched the wind, and all the noise of the world had dissolved. No one calls it a miracle, because he himself once taught, when the mind is still, all things are still. When the mind is silent, even the universe ceases to move. Perhaps the body of Huineng remains, not to prove anything, but simply to remind us that when the mind truly stops, time no longer has anywhere to go. If one day you visit Ho Chi Minh City, Vietnam, once known by its old name, Saigon, you'll find a city alive with noise and motion, its streets never standing still. But in the midst of that endless rhythm, there exists a place where time itself seems to have stopped. A quiet corner of the city, where the memory of a heart once burning in fire still glows and has never gone out. It was the morning of June 11th, 1963. In the heart of Saigon, a Buddhist monk in a saffron robe stepped out of an old blue car. He bowed his head, joined his palms, and sat down calmly in the middle of the street. Before him was a small can of gasoline. No one yet understood what was about to happen. Then the flame rose. In that instant, the noise of the city stopped. Engines went silent. People froze. And amidst the fire, he remained still, his body motionless, his face serene, as though deep in meditation. The photograph, captured by journalist Malcolm Brown, spread across the world. It needed no explanation, for it spoke the language of silence. People saw a body in flames, but what they felt was a consciousness shining through the fire. No anger, no hatred, only a flame of compassion, so powerful that the world could not look away. After the cremation ceremony, his ashes were gathered, and within them, something extraordinary was found. His heart remained intact. Witnesses said that even after 2 separate cremations, the heart did not burn. It was called the heart relic, the heart of compassion. The relic was once enshrined at Jaloi Pagoda in Saigon, and today it remains carefully preserved in Vietnam, revered as a sacred symbol of consciousness that transcends the body. No one called it a miracle, for within that fire, there was nothing supernatural, only a man who had let go completely. He let go of the body. He let go of fear. And what remained was love. That flame did not die with him. It spread like a vow, a silent spark, awakening millions of sleeping hearts. And even now, when people look again at that photograph, they see not only an act of sacrifice, but the question the fire left for humanity: when the body has turned to ash, what is it that cannot be burned? 4 human beings, 4 different ways of touching the threshold between life and death. In the coldest land on earth, a lama still sits in meditation beneath the frozen ground of Siberia, his body unchanged after nearly a century. On the Tibetan plateau, a gentle monk smiled and dissolved into light, leaving behind nothing but a saffron robe and stillness. Within an ancient temple in Guangdong, an awakened master has remained seated in silence for more than 1,000 years, his eyes half closed, as if gazing into a place where time can no longer reach. And in the heart of Saigon in 1963, a man sat down amid the roar of traffic and flame, leaving the world a heart that would not burn. Each story reveals a different form of transcendence. None of them tried to defy death. They simply walked into it, with stillness, with faith, and with an awareness so profound that the world itself had to pause and watch. Scientists are still searching for answers. At the University of Michigan, researchers recorded a surge of brain waves in the moments just after the heart had stopped. Elsewhere, studies on Tukdam meditation observed
Science
monks
calls it
whose bodies
clinical
remain
death.
warm and supple days after clinical death. These findings do not prove faith. They illuminate a possibility that consciousness may continue beyond the body. Perhaps it is energy, perhaps memory, or perhaps what the masters call mind itself, a state that exists beyond birth and decay. From Siberia to Tibet, from China to Vietnam, these 4 lives mark 4 points on the same map, each whispering the same question. What remains when everything we call ourselves is gone? Maybe they stayed behind, not to be worshipped, but to remind us that the path to the other side of the veil does not begin with death, but with awareness while we are still alive. Perhaps the veil between life and death was never truly there. We call it a veil only because we fear what we do not understand. But if we pause and listen deeply, we might see that it is nothing more than a thin mist passing between 2 breaths. Those we met along the way, the one who sat in the snow, the one who dissolved into light, the one who kept his wisdom, and the one who left behind his heart, they never truly disappeared. They simply merged into all that is, like small sparks returning to the vast ocean of light. And if consciousness never truly dies, then perhaps it moves still, in the touch of morning wind, in the glow of dawn, in the quiet heartbeat of the one listening now. And somewhere within that silence, a story begins to unfold. They say that in the stillness of the universe, there once was a tiny spark, a being named Tam. Tam had no form, no sound, only pure awareness, setting out on its endless journey. It put on its first robe, a fragile body. And with that robe, a thin thread called karma began to weave. Through countless lives, Tam changed forms again and again. Each thought, each action added a new thread to the tapestry, golden ones of kindness, gray ones of sorrow and dark ones of anger. Then one day, a great storm rose, the storm of ignorance. It tangled all the threads together and hid the path from Tam's sight. Lost and afraid, Tam reached for glittering ornaments, desire, attachment, pride, only to find they were heavy, pulling it deeper into the mud of darkness. In the stillness beneath that weight, Tam felt something small and solid in the mud, a seed of wisdom, waiting patiently through lifetimes of forgetting. Tam finally understood. The ornaments were chains. With one quiet breath, it let them go. And the moment it did, the seed began to grow, a white lotus rising through murky waters, unfolding toward the light. Seated upon that lotus, Tam looked at the tangled threads, no longer in fear, but with patience and clarity. And as each knot was gently untied, light filled the spaces between. When the final thread was released, everything dissolved into radiance. The robe of form disappeared. Tam became light, not gone, but whole. And the universe, in its silence, smiled, for a single spark had found its way home. Maybe we are not so different from Tam. Maybe we too have simply forgotten what we are. Light, trying to remember itself. Science calls it awareness. Buddhism calls it mind. And perhaps, as Tam discovered, it is not something to find, but something to remember. No one truly knows what happens after death. But perhaps what matters more is how we live, knowing that each breath is as delicate and as sacred as death itself. If there truly is an other side, then the door doesn't open when we die. It opens when we become fully present. Sit still for a moment. Do nothing. Feel the breath moving in and out. Listen to the smallest sound. And notice there is something watching it all. It has no name, no form, but it is here, quiet, radiant, unchanging. That is what those who remained wanted us to remember. That behind every question about death lies a gentle invitation, live, as if your consciousness has already crossed the veil.